Hi students, this is Ms. Bosu. I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a quick overview as to what you guys will be doing today as our first day of distance learning. So we left off a couple weeks ago now in the middle of our cultural geography unit. And we are going to do about one more week on cultural geography. And so this PowerPoint that I'm showing you right now should look a little bit familiar as to the one we've been using for this whole unit. But today we're going to move on to another concept of identity. So right before we had our break, we were talking about gender, and you guys did that discussion post about gender, and we talked about how gender is one way that we formulate our own identity and how other people identify us. And just remembering the concept of identity as being something about how we make sense of ourselves, how we construct our identities through experiences, emotions, connections, and rejections. Another thing that's significant about identity can be how we identify as a race or an ethnicity. So when I talk about the terms race and ethnicity, they are different things. And I'm just going to go over kind of the two different categories. A racial category is really a category that was created by people. It is not something that is biologically based. It is not something that determines whether or not you have any genetic closeness to another person. But the concept was created by people, and the concept has often been used to assign people to different groups. Racial categories really didn't exist till about 500, 400, or 500 years ago, as people started to try to justify the exploitation and the colonization of people around the world. And people were basically placed into very broad categories just based on the color of their skin. And your skin color is really only a small piece of your genetic makeup. And so racial categories have been used to group people and to exploit and take advantage of people, and really also to determine how or to justify saying that one group of people was superior to other groups of people. Racial categories change over time, and that once again kind of showing that they're not they're not at all really based on a whole lot of genetics. On the other hand, when we talk about the term ethnicity, what we're talking about is how this is more based on our ancestry, our ethnic group, also this idea of having a homeland. And so although most of us living in the United States have come from all over the world, our ethnicity might be able to be tied back to our ancestry, the homeland of the people that we consider to be our ancestry. And ethnicity is oftentimes more of a category that we choose to belong to rather than one that has been assigned to us. Now, with all this, categories of race are not unimportant, and people have used identities of race to also have grown to use that as part of their identity. And a piece of their identity may be that they can be that they do identify with other groups of people based on that. So when we do today's activity, just kind of remember that race and ethnicity are not the same thing. And race is really just very broad categories that we kind of place people in. So for today's activity, or for today's lesson, you will be going to Schoology. So here is your human geography page. You actually should have already done this, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video. But the distance learning folder is where we're going to have everything. And you're going to go to the folder that is Monday, March 30th. And so what you have seen once I complete this video is you'll first of all see the video that you're watching right now in this folder. But the second thing you're going to do is you're going to be watching a video about the census. And so on top of those categories, race and ethnicity, what you're going to be taking a look at is how we identify race and ethnicity of people in the United States on the 2020 census. And you're going to be comparing that to the 2010 census. So please watch the video about what the census is, but in essence, the census is a count of the people. Nearly every country takes a census of their people, and the reason that they need to count their people is so that they can determine what type of representation different areas need. And so, for example, Minnesota currently has 8 representatives that we send to Washington, D.C. that represent the people of Minnesota. If our population significantly changes after this next count, our last count hasn't been since 2010 because it happens every 10 years. But if our population significantly changes, we might lose a representative or potentially gain a representative. Another reason that the census is important is that it determines the funds and the allocation of resources the government gives different communities of people. So, census day is actually April 1st, which is Wednesday. Your parents or whoever is the head of your household should have received an invitation to fill out the census, and they could have already done that. But they just need to, the goal is to have everyone in the country counted this year, preferably by April 1st. So talk to your parents about filling out that census, and you can actually fill it out with them if you want. But on the US Census, there is a category that asks for people's race and ethnicity. And just so you know, the census is confidential. This information is really just used in aggregate to try to figure out different groups of people and how different identities, but it is not something that um, the government is going to give to institutions to use against you by any means. So what you're going to be asked to do on this, and this is really your assignment for today, is you're going to take a look at the race and ethnicity questions in the 2010 census versus the 2020 census. If you scroll down, you'll see that 2010 census, and then you'll see that 2020 census as well. So you are going to answer these questions that you'll see in pink, and you're going to start by comparing. So what are the main changes between the 2010 and the 2020 census? The first, once again, is the 2010. The first kind of key thing I want you to pay attention to is there's two separate categories. The first one asks you if the person is Hispanic, Latino, or of Spanish origin. And you answer that question, so you could write no or yes, and then you could be more specific. And then on top of that, they ask the person's race. So let's say you consider yourself Hispanic. You could also consider yourself white Hispanic, black Hispanic, American Indian Hispanic, so on and so forth. And so there are two separate categories. But now we get into the race category. In 2010, if I identified as white or black African American, then I didn't have any other big options to write down anything more about myself. Those were just really, really broad categories. In today's census, in 2020, if you scroll down, you see the white versus black and African American. You do have an option to write in more specifically information about your ethnicity. And so I could say I am white Egyptian, I could say I'm black Somali, and you can also do that with other categories as well. So you're going to just compare, you're going to answer these questions, you're going to write down what box do you think that you would check, and do you think this box reflects your identity very well? And then how relevant are discussions of race in this country today? All right, so that is the goal of today. Thank you. Tomorrow you're going to be doing an activity with taboos. I probably will not have a video that goes along with that because there's a video that explains that. And we're going to do about one more week of culture, and then we'll move on to political geography next week. All right, thanks.